It was supposed to be just another Sunday, family gathered together, the smell of roasting meat, laughter drifting through the backyard. But out of nowhere, my mother stood up, gripped her wine glass tightly, and uttered a sentence that pierced everyone's heart. "You're not family anymore." The silence that followed was so heavy that even the birds stopped singing. I froze. The grill was still crackling. The fan was turning slowly, but everything around me seemed frozen. It was as if time had paused just for everyone to digest those words. Eyes began to meet. My aunt looked away, and my father squinted as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. And she repeated it, firmer, colder. "You're not family anymore, and I hope you understand." My throat went dry. My heart raced and my stomach churned. My older brother slowly put down his glass and tried to say something, but my mother held up her hand, shushing him. It was as if she'd been rehearsing this for months. My world was spinning. I tried to understand why. Had I done something so serious? I looked around for support, for someone to defend me, to say enough, but no one moved. It was like being naked in the middle of a courtroom. Every second of silence hurt more than a scream. Time split into before and after that sentence. Nothing made sense anymore. The previous conversations about work, life, plans, faded from my memory. I wanted to disappear, vanish from that place, escape that moment, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the ground were holding me down. Share this story to reach further. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video on WhatsApp and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. There wasn't even time to react. My cousin tried to lighten the mood by saying the picanha was perfectly cooked, but no one laughed. It was as if the barbecue had turned into a funeral, and I was the one who was dead. Everyone looked at me as if I were guilty of something I didn't even know what it was. My mother turned her back and sat back down, as if nothing had happened. She picked up the plate, served the salad, and continued talking to my aunt about her new haircut. I remained there, rooted to the spot, my eyes welling up, trying to figure out if this was real. I pinched myself. It was real. My father finally gathered his courage and asked, "Do you think this was necessary, Helena?" She looked at him, took a deep breath, and said, "She knew what she was doing. I'm just putting a period on it." And she went back to chewing as if she'd just said she'd forgotten to pay a bill. No one knew where to look. My younger cousin whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded without responding. How could I be okay? That was my mother. That was my family, and no one stood up for me. I felt heat rise in my face, a mixture of shame, anger, and abandonment. How could anyone do this to their own daughter? I stood up slowly. I grabbed my bag with trembling hands. My eyes searched one last time for support, a reaction, a gesture of affection. Nothing. Just downcast faces, averted eyes. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I walked out the gate with the sound of flesh cracking behind me, and my heart in pieces. The truth is, that day was just the culmination of something that had been breaking for a long time. My mother was never an easy woman, proud, controlling, the kind who always needed to be right. For as long as I can remember, she had this way of measuring me, of testing me. But over time, that stopped being caring and turned into judgment. The tension began to build the day I decided to leave home. I was 24 and wanted to live on my own, work, pay my bills, build something of my own. But for her, this was an attack. She said I was running away from my family, that I thought I was better than everyone else. In reality, I just wanted peace. The relationship soured completely when I started dating someone she didn't approve of. "That guy will drive you away from us," she'd say. But what she never understood was that I was already driven away, not because of him, but because of how she treated me. It was always about control, about her having the final say, even on my choices. I tried to stay in touch, to be there for Sunday lunches, to call every now and then, but it all felt forced. It was like walking on broken glass. One wrong word, and everything would fall apart. And yet, I kept trying, because deep down, I still wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be a part of it, even with all the pain. The barbecue was just the final spark, but the embers had been burning for years. And when she said I wasn't family anymore, it wasn't a surprise. It was just confirmation of what I'd felt for a long time. I was never part of that family the way I should have been. I was the piece that never fit. That night, after the barbecue, I sat on the couch in my apartment, staring into space. The TV was on, but I couldn't hear anything. My mother's words echoed in my head like a hammer pounding relentlessly. I wondered if I should have kept quiet. If I had acted differently, maybe she wouldn't have done it. But the truth is, I did what anyone would do. I chose my freedom. I chose to live a life without fear. I chose to love whoever I wanted to love. And if that was a crime in her eyes, then maybe the problem wasn't me. For the first time, I began to question whether her love had always been conditioned on obedience. I spent hours sifting through old messages, trying to understand where everything had started to fall apart. I relived conversations, arguments, long silences, and I noticed a pattern. I always gave in, always swallowed the blame to keep the peace. That night, however, was the first time I didn't bow my head, and she couldn't stand it. It hurt. It hurt like something had been ripped from inside. But at the same time, there was a small spark of relief, the feeling that the game was finally over. I no longer needed to try to fit into a mold that was never mine. It was time to accept myself, even if it meant losing my family. The next morning, I decided I wouldn't apologize. I wouldn't explain myself. I wouldn't beg to return to a place where I'd never truly been accepted. That decision cost me dearly. It cost me sleepless nights, longing, and missing important dates. But it also brought me something I'd never had: inner peace. In the following days, my mother's silence spread like a plague. First, my aunt left me hanging on WhatsApp. Then, my cousin, who had always been my confidant, stopped liking my photos and replying to my stories. In less than a week, it felt like I had been officially erased from my own family's existence. I felt like an outsider in my own story. The people I'd grown up with, the ones in my birthday photos, now acted like I was a threat. There was no conversation, no chance to explain my side, just silent, cruel judgment from all sides. The cruelest part was realizing my mother was telling her own version, full of distortions. She said I had publicly disrespected her, that I spit in the plate I ate from, and that I turned my back on those who always loved me. None of these statements conveyed the truth, but the truth there didn't matter. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it maintains their comfort zone. I became the perfect target: rebellious, ungrateful, selfish. It was easier to paint myself that way than to face the subtle abuses that had always been part of our family dynamic. Easier to isolate myself than to look at my own inaction. The most painful betrayal was my brother's. He didn't block me, but he didn't say anything either. He disappeared. He left the messages unanswered, as if he hadn't seen them. He was always the quietest, the most neutral, but in that silence, he chose a side, and it wasn't mine. It broke me in a way not even my mother could. A few days later, one morning, my phone vibrated. It was a message, an unknown number. I opened it without thinking. It was from my father. It just said, "Daughter, I know nothing justifies what happened, but I wanted you to know that I'm here." I stared at the screen as if the words were lies. My father was never one to take a stand. Always silent, always avoiding conflict. During the barbecue, he didn't stand up, didn't argue, just lowered his head. But that message, however small, was a breath of fresh air, a helping hand in the midst of a sinking sea. And in that moment, I desperately needed it. I responded with a simple thank you. The tears came on their own. It wasn't much, but it was something. In that moment, I realized that not all was lost. Maybe there was still a glimmer of connection amidst the abyss. Maybe I still had a chance to rebuild myself, even without the rest of my family. The next day, he called me. His voice was shaking. I didn't know what to do. "Your mother was beside herself, but I'm truly sorry." It was the first time in years I'd heard my father say he felt something. It shook me. It didn't solve everything, but it punched a hole in the armor I'd been building. He invited me to lunch, just the two of us. I accepted. And at that lunch, we began to weave, stitch by stitch, a new relationship, without the shadow of my mother, without lies, just two human beings trying to understand where everything went wrong, and if there was still something worth salvaging. After lunch with my father, I returned home and opened a box that had been stored in the back of the closet. Inside were old photos, birthday letters, drawings I'd made for my mother as a child. I began to see everything with new eyes. Every memory now came with a pang of pain. I saw a photo from my 6th birthday. I was smiling in a red dress, my mother kneeling beside me, smiling too. But I remembered that day. I remembered the slap I got before the party for getting my new clothes dirty. I remembered how much I cried in the bathroom and how they forced me to smile for the camera. How many memories do we bury just to maintain the idea that we had a happy childhood? I began to understand that the rejection I felt today stemmed from much earlier. I just hadn't named it. Since I was little, my worth was measured by my usefulness, my obedience, how much I pleased. I cried right there, sitting on the bedroom floor, but it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't a cry of pity, it was a cry of grief. I was burying the idea of the perfect mother, the close-knit family, the safe home. All of that never existed, and as painful as it was, there was something liberating in finally seeing the truth. I closed the box, but kept a photo with me. Me, still a little girl, drawing with colored pencils. I kept it because, despite everything, that little girl still existed inside me, and she deserved love. Not my mother's conditioned love, but real love, the kind I would learn to give myself. 2 months later, on a rainy afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart sank. It was her, my mother, holding a red umbrella, her face more serious than I remembered. I felt a mixture of anger, fear, and curiosity, but I opened it. She walked in without saying a word, wet but impeccable. She sat on the sofa, looked around, and took a deep breath. I remained standing. The silence was almost palpable, until she said, "I'm not here to apologize. I'm just here to say that I still think you're wrong." That was like being punched in the stomach. I was shocked. She hadn't changed at all. She still needed to be right. She still needed me to bow down. The difference was that now I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I hadn't opened the door expecting a perfect apology, but I expected, at the very least, humanity. And she didn't even bring that. I replied calmly, "Then why did you come?" She hesitated. "Because I'm still your mother." I swallowed hard. The same old emotional blackmail. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. I didn't need a mother who only showed up to reassert her power. I needed truth, respect, a love that didn't come with an instruction manual. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. She stood, straightened her coat, and left without a hug, without looking back. I closed the door and realized something important. That woman no longer had power over me. For the first time, I was free. Not from pain, but from fear. And that changed everything. After that visit, silence reigned again. But this time, it didn't destroy me. It became a shield. A space where I began to rebuild myself, far from the voices that told me who I should be. The silence, once deafening, became fertile ground for understanding who I truly was without the shadow of my family. I started therapy. In the first few sessions, I just cried. I couldn't speak, just pain. But little by little, I began to learn to name the holes my mother had left. Each session was like pulling on a hidden thread and discovering that my entire life had been stitched together with fear, guilt, and obligation. At work, my productivity improved. For the first time, I felt whole outside of the chaos. I started cooking for myself, tidying the house with care, playing music while I washed the dishes. Simple things that once seemed pointless were now forms of self-care. I started choosing myself. Of course, the absence still hurt. On special occasions, birthdays, Christmas, there was a void, but I stopped chasing after her. If anyone asked me about my mother, I would firmly answer, "We have no contact," without needing to justify it, without cringing. I no longer felt guilty for having set boundaries. This silence, this distancing, was the most painful and most necessary thing I've ever done. The girl who once accepted crumbs of affection now knew her worth. The woman emerging from that silence no longer begged for acceptance. She chose herself, and that was true healing. One random Saturday, as I went downstairs to get the mail, I found a white envelope with no return address. The name was handwritten in a handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. It was my mother's. My heart raced. I climbed the stairs trembling, feeling the letter burn in my palm. I sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside was a simple piece of paper, folded 3 times. It said she'd dreamed about me, that I was sad, crying, and that this had made her wake up with a weight on her chest. "I don't know if I can go back, but I needed to tell you that I miss you." That was all. No apology, no admission. The letter struck a chord with me. I knew it was the closest thing she could come to a show of repentance, but still, it seemed little. After everything, after being expelled in front of her entire family, after being silenced, ignored, condemned, missing her wasn't enough. I put the letter in a drawer. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't text. I needed more than vague words to rebuild a bridge she'd burned herself. Love is more than saying you miss someone. It's acting differently. And until that moment, she'd done nothing but preserve her own pride. But despite everything, it didn't hurt like it used to. Because I was no longer waiting for redemption. I no longer lived by that bond. The letter was just another page in a chapter I'd already begun to turn. The power was back in my hands. And that changed the whole story. Over time, I began to realize that not everyone had turned their backs on me. Little by little, unexpected people began reaching out. Coworkers, neighbors, even an old friend from school messaged me saying she'd heard rumors about my feud with my family and wanted to know how I was doing. It was strange at first. I was so used to rejection that I was wary of any kind gesture. But these people didn't demand anything. They didn't want explanations or justifications. They were just there, with kind words, invitations for coffee, or simply to listen without judgment. One of those people was Anna, a co-worker who became a friend without me realizing it. She listened to me attentively, without interrupting, and she was the first to say, "You're not hard to love. You've just been loved the wrong way for too long." That sentence broke me down, but it also rebuilt me. From then on, I realized that perhaps family wasn't just the one you're born into, but also the one you choose. People who respect your limits, who accept your flaws, who don't use love as a bargaining chip. This changed the way I saw the world. I could create my own bonds, from scratch. I no longer needed a full table if the price was to annihilate me. A true connection, even with just one person, was worth more than any poisoned blood tie. I began to feel truly loved, without needing to be perfect. And that, after all, was the greatest victory. After almost a year of no contact, my brother showed up. He sent me a simple message. "We can talk?" My heart was torn. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part had been screaming for this moment for months. I agreed. We met at a discreet cafe on a Saturday morning. He arrived nervously, fidgeting with his hands, unshaven, his eyes downcast. When he saw me, he smiled shyly and said, "Sorry." It was the first word, and the most important. He said he felt caught in the crossfire, that he was afraid to take sides, that he was wrong for not doing anything. I listened silently. His every word was like a bandage carefully placed over an old wound. He said my mother was sick inside, that she refused to see her own flaws, and that he himself had spent years trying to please her without success. "You were just the first to say no." We cried together, there, in the middle of the cafe. The people around us ignored us. But for me, that moment was sacred. He was my brother, my flesh and blood, and he was trying to reach me. I truly felt that connection could still be rekindled. And in that moment, I decided to forgive. Forgiving wasn't forgetting what happened. It was letting go of the burden, letting go of the anger, choosing to rebuild with someone who wanted to start over. And my brother did. With him, I didn't have to beg. I didn't have to diminish myself. I just had to be open. And this time, the choice paid off. Months had passed since my mother's visit, and I thought that chapter had closed. But then my father called me saying she wanted to see me, alone, without an audience, without a speech. He said she was different, more tired, that she had started to reflect on everything. I hesitated, but accepted. I met in a park, outdoors. I needed space to breathe, in case this turned into another emotional battle. When she arrived, I was shocked. She was visibly thinner, her gray hair loose, and no makeup. She didn't have that air of authority. She had something more human, more broken. We sat in silence. She looked at me like she was trying to find something she'd lost. Then she said, "I failed you." There was no arrogance in his voice, no attempt at manipulation, only pain, and a recognition I never imagined I'd hear in my life. My heart, despite everything, softened. She said it took her a while to realize how much she'd hurt me, that she grew up in a rigid environment where love was synonymous with control, and that it was only after losing my presence that she understood what that cost. "You weren't rebellious. You just wanted to be yourself, and I couldn't handle that." She cried. For the first time in her life, she cried in front of me. I cried too, not because everything had been resolved, but because in that moment, I saw my mother as I'd never seen her before, a limited, scared, flawed woman. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for. It was a chance to try to be something else. I didn't promise to get back together, but I promised to be open. And that day, something truly began to change. After that meeting, my mother and I began exchanging short messages. Nothing forced, no demands. It was like walking through a minefield, but carefully. She started listening to me more. She started asking how I was without trying to fix everything. And little by little, I started giving her space. We met a few more times. A walk in the park, a quick coffee. Always neutral, always cautious. It was strange not to fall back into old dynamics, but it was also comforting to see that something new could be built, even if it was on top of the rubble of everything that had broken. She didn't become the perfect mother, nor did I return to being the daughter she idealized. But now there was respect. And most importantly, there was truth. When something bothered me, I spoke up. When she crossed a line, I backed off. We learned to talk, to negotiate, and most importantly, to recognize our limitations. I was surprised by how much she began to listen. Sometimes she made mistakes and backtracked, something that would have been impossible before. I realized that some people only change when they feel they've truly lost, and in this case, the loss was what paved the way for rebuilding. Even so, I knew maintaining this would require constant effort. We no longer lived under the same emotional roof. Now, we had clear boundaries, and curiously, that's what made our coexistence possible. When I stopped expecting her to be someone else, I was able to see the woman who truly existed there, and from that, something sincere could be born. Today I look back and see that nothing was in vain. Every silence, every rejection, every solitary tear forced me to look within and discover something no one ever taught me. I can be my own family. I can embrace myself, protect myself, choose myself, without depending on the validation of those who don't know how to love me properly. The pain hasn't gone away. It's just moved. Now, it lives in a corner of my memory, like a scar. It no longer defines me, but it reminds me of where I came from. And more importantly, it shows me how much I've grown. I no longer seek approval. Today, I seek connection with myself, with those who respect me, with those who choose to stay without hurting me. My mother is still my mother, but now she understands that love doesn't give the right to destroy. And I'm still a daughter, but a daughter who sets limits, who loves consciously, who knows that presence without respect is absence in disguise. Our bond now is different, lighter, more real. My father is still present, and my brother, more than ever, is my safe haven. I've also rebuilt new friendships, new networks, new possibilities in life. I discovered that there is life beyond trauma, beyond the house where you were born. I discovered that yes, it is possible to be born again, even as an adult, even wounded. If you're listening to this and feel rejected, forgotten, and expelled from your own story, know this: you're not alone. And most importantly, you can write a new beginning. You are enough, and never ever let anyone take that away from you. This story was real. It was intense. And if you've made it this far, it's because some part of it touched you too. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Maybe you're still trying to understand your own wounds. Or maybe you're trying to break free from a place where love only comes with conditions. Whatever the reason, you're not alone. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you can, share a bit of your story too. I read everything with great care, and you can be sure there's someone in this world who will feel less alone after reading what you have to say. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. Share this video on WhatsApp, in your family group, or with that friend who's going through a difficult time. Sometimes, a story is all someone needs to find the courage to change, to understand that they deserve more, that they can rebuild their lives even after the worst. Subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories, and leave a like if this narrative made you feel something. This will really help bring this content to more people who need to hear it. Thank you for sticking with me this far. Remember, you don't have to fit into a place where love hurts. You deserve a love that's light, safe, and embraces you. And if no one told you this today, I'll say it now. You're worth so much. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time.